So this is a setup my wife and I've had at our basement for many years. We sit back to back. It takes up about 6 to 7 feet or so, and she has a pre-made desk. I have one that I made myself. The problem is that we take up a lot of space off the back wall in our basement, and it's just not an efficient use of space, especially with our son getting older and having more stuff. We need as much space as we can get. So I asked my wife one day, can I build us a new desk setup? And she said, let me visualize it and see what's going on. So I went into SketchUp and built a desk setup. This is not the final version. She knocked out all the shelving on the left-hand side because she didn't want it on her side of the desk. But the general concept is the same. It's going to be generally a floating desk that goes from left to right all the way across the walls in our basement. And then in the center is going to be a little bookcase kind of area that has a door on it. It's not super detailed in this drawing, but you get the idea of what it's supposed to be. And she gave me the okay to go ahead and start working on it. Structurally, this thing is really not all that hard to build. It's 2x4s that are lag bolted right into the studs on the walls. The hardest part of this was the cabinet in the middle, mainly because it needed to be exactly even, set up perfectly so that it would fit everything properly and align with everything. The walls in our basement are terribly bowed, as you'll see a little bit later, and it was kind of just a challenge to make sure everything fit properly while still looking like it was supposed to be square. So I went to the hardware store, had them cut down a sheet of plywood for me because I can't fit a whole sheet of plywood in my car, and picked up a couple other trim pieces that were going to be used for the cabinet that I would eventually make. I had everything cut down mostly to the size that I wanted, but there were a few adjustments I needed to make, so I took out my little circular saw here. I really wish I had a bigger one, but the idea here is I used the rip fence, went through and kind of cut the sides down to make sure that it fit exactly what I wanted to do. I had to cut the cabinet sides and the cabinet shelves to different sizes, so I had them all start out at the big size, and then I could cut them down a little bit later. My table saw is also not big enough to really support these kind of things safely or in a way that I'm comfortable with, so this is what I did. After the initial cuts, it was time to go through and break down the larger pieces into the sides and also the shelves themselves. So here I'm just marking it out, making sure that I have it set up, and basically striking a center line from one side to the other. My square is not big enough to reach all the way across this, so I started off with a center line and then did it on the other side and then connected them through a straight piece of aluminum that you can see here. I have this thing that clamps on to plywood and allows me to just make straight cuts without needing a rip fence or anything like that. Always make sure I check it for square on both ends because it tends to wander sometimes. It's not a really good tool, but it works for what I need it to. And then at that point you go through and grab the circular saw and just run it through, and you get a straight cut going the length of whatever you need. I then finally had pieces manageable enough to stick through my table saw, so I went through and made clean 90-degree cuts on my table saw just to make sure everything would be square when I assembled it. At this point, the sides needed to have their toe kick cut out, so I went through and marked that out. I really wish I would have made this a little bit taller in hindsight because my Roomba doesn't fit underneath it. It gets stuck sometimes, but hindsight's 20/20 and it works fine and it looks nice. I used a jigsaw to cut this out, just nice and slow, and I apologize for this being a little out of focus. The last thing I needed to cut was the piece of wood that would go across the back that I would use to attach the cabinet carcass onto the studs, and also the front of the toe kick. So this is just me cutting these out real fast. Now it's time to add all of the pocket holes that are going to hold all of this stuff together. I started off with the stretcher pieces that were again reused for the front toe kick and also for the pieces in the back that attach the studs. Drilled those in real quick, did both sides, and got them all assembled. Before we go any further, let's talk about how this cabinet's going to be assembled and what it's going to look like. So at the bottom left is where the toe kick's at. Then I have 2 shelves. I originally had 3, but my wife decided she wanted 2, so cool. This actually changed a little later on. Then we have the cross members that go in the back that are going to screw into the studs of the wall. And then finally there's a piece across the top that's going to attach to the 2x4s so I can tie the whole system together. Back to the build. This is just adding glue, pocket screws, and using a 90-degree clamp to kind of put it all together so that I know it's in there properly, or as close to properly as it can get, and then just setting it up and screwing it in. I did the exact same method to go ahead and attach the sides to the top and the backs, and basically all the stuff is tied together with pocket screws using my 90-degree clamps. And here's the completed cabinet carcass. I still need to paint it obviously and also add some edge banding, but the general structure is done and it's ready to go and it's nice and square. The next step was to go ahead and paint the wall because we didn't like the color that was there, and also to remove anything from the wall that was previously on there because it obviously needed to be moved in order to paint. I then found the center of the wall, measured out the distance between each of the sides of the cabinet, and cut out the baseboard using an oscillating saw. After cutting both lines with the saw, I just needed to use a utility knife to separate that area from the board itself and from the wall, and then I had a nice opening that I could slide the cabinet right into. I originally got lag bolts for this project, and my studs in my basement are only 2x3s, so those would have just been enormous on those things. So I went back and got lag screws, which are just as strong but much smaller, don't require pre-drilling or anything like this. All I did was mark out the center of where I needed to go and drilled them right in. Now, I didn't film a lot of the next steps because it's just cutting 2x4s, and that's pretty boring. Essentially, 2x4s, I split them into two sections, one for my wife's side, one for my side, and they're 24 inches deep. I just used pocket screws at 2.5 inches long, screwed them in, and we're ready to go. And then again, I used lag screws to get them into the studs. This whole setup, doing this, took probably about a half hour to do. So it's very quick to make the frames. It's very quick to go ahead and attach them to the walls, as long as you take the time to make sure you get things as square as possible. As you can see from the center section, I left just a little bit of room where I could slide a 1/2 inch piece of plywood in to tie the two together. This was just to account for any variation in the walls that I couldn't measure from the height that the studs are at. And this is a little closer up view of what I did. You can see that it's pretty simple. And over here on the right hand side, on my side of the desk, I had to tie a little piece of plywood in because the wall bends out. But I'll tie all this in, and I tied underneath the cabinet to both sides of the studs. My wife wanted this project done as quickly as possible, so basically I went out and bought some 4-foot by 2-foot pieces of pine board. Really simple, pretty inexpensive, and nice and smooth and flat. So I got 3 of those, cut them down, and we had to account for some of the wall variation as well. To do that, I just got a compass and ran it against the side, and basically you can follow the line with a jigsaw and fit it exactly to your wall. Once fit, I drew a laser line down the middle, marked out where I wanted the holes for plastic grommets to go for wires and whatever I needed, and started drilling with a hole saw. The final thing to do was to add a face frame, and I just glued it and then added some brad nails to put it in there, and then stained and done. Here you can see the stain along with the beginnings of my side of the desk setup. And here's the whole thing prior to adding the front door of the cabinet and wall decorations. Now, I didn't film any of the building of the door, but it's just miter joints with a rabbet cut in it and then a 1/4 inch piece of plywood on there with a hinge painted and put onto the front of the cabinet. Here are all the wall decorations along with a lot of my wife's art that just looks awesome, and I'm very happy with how this came out. And this is what my desk looks like as I edited this video. And here it is all done. Is it perfect? No. There's definitely some areas I would like to improve or to change or to do over in the future. But in all honesty, I'm really happy. I love the back wall color. I love the contrast of the blue and the white. If you take a notice from the original thing that I had on there, that little kind of honeycomb hex thing, that's the same thing, just painted white, and it really pops now. It looks really nice. We added a couple of floating shelves because my wife wanted to hang up some pictures and do all of that. And then we have a place to display everything, and we're able to keep all of our stuff on our desk. And when we want to put it away, we have a place to put it. It's worked out really well for us. I'm very, very happy with how this came out. And the main goal of saving space was absolutely accomplished. We no longer have to dedicate a large area of our basement to just having our desk. We can go ahead and push our chairs in, and we can save a lot of space and have it set up and ready to go. It's in a nice, clean, organized spot, and it really catches the eye when you come down to the basement. Again, I couldn't be happier with how this looks, and I'm really glad that I had a chance to go through and make something for my house.